David McGillivray here on YouTube and Patreon with it's a rather different episode of Little Did You Know this week, and this is why. It's my very great honour to be able to bring to a wider audience a tragic but ultimately quite inspiring story. Earlier this year, my friend Andrew Baker announced on social media that it's 35 years since he was the victim of a hate crime. But of course, in those days, the term had barely been coined. In fact, hate crime didn't become official in the UK until 1998, and it wasn't until 2003 that sexual orientation could be flagged as an element of hate crime. What happened was that in 1986, somebody threw sulfuric acid into Andrew's face. I'm going to let him tell you the whole story. He's with us now. Andrew, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Okay, you're welcome. Where would you like me to start? Sort of some background to what happened prior to that.
Well, I think first of all, I find it almost inconceivable that you're willing to relive such a terrifying night. I mean, are you sure you're okay with this?
I'm perfectly fine talking about it. I've never shied away from talking about it because it's something that isn't talked about. It's often not talked about when men are attacked. So I'm happy to talk about it.
I'm very, very pleased indeed. Now, this happened pre-internet, so there's virtually nothing online about this case.
Yeah,
Almost as though it never happened. Now, how do you feel about that?
I think at the time we didn't know any better. There was the media were approached. The local newspaper where I was living at the time in London printed the story on the front page, but the national newspapers wouldn't get involved with it for the reason that they gave me was because I was gay. They wouldn't push the story.
Yes, these are very different times indeed. Yes, we should always remind ourselves of that, and we're going to come on to that. Well, first things first. You're talking to us from your home in Cornwall, but
That's right.
1986 you weren't living there. So tell us, in 1986, who were you? Where were you? Tell us about yourself.
Well, in 1986, I was 25 years old. I was working as a butler, working Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, for the chairman of Eagle Star Insurance in the city. And I was in a relationship with a guy. I'd been in a relationship with him for about 3 years, an Egyptian guy. It wasn't a good relationship. It wasn't a healthy relationship. And I left that relationship. And we were living at the time in Wimbledon, and I found a little room to rent in East Dulwich, completely new area to me.
Tell us, why wasn't it healthy?
It wasn't healthy, partly because we come from two different cultures. He was Egyptian, he was Muslim. He was gay and Muslim, and that caused him, a few sort of problems. He wasn't strict Muslim. He didn't observe Ramadan, and he didn't pray 5 times a day. He wasn't strict. He used to drink alcohol. So there's a few things that he would do, and there was things that he wouldn't do. So, but it was okay. It only became a problem at times. He was very sort of much the alpha male, if you like, in the relationship, and in that way he was quite controlling.
Okay.
And on one occasion it resulted in violence.
So you split up. How much later was it that this incident occurred?
It was about 2 weeks later. Whether or not my ex was involved, I have no idea. He was arrested, he was questioned, he was let go. So there was no evidence that he was involved. The police believed that it was a random attack. I believe that possibly he was involved, but also possibly it could have been racial, because East Dulwich was a very black area. I was new to the area. I was probably obviously quite feminine, and maybe, that had something to do with it. I don't know.
And to this day, nobody has been charged with this crime.
No, nobody's been charged.
Okay. Tell us what happened on, this sounds like police procedural. Tell us what happened on the night in question.
Well, it was the morning, actually. It was 8 o'clock in the morning. I was going to work, and I had to come out of my house, down the street to the bus stop. And I got halfway down the street, and I heard somebody running up behind me. And I just turned to see who it was, because I thought somebody I knew. And as I turned, they threw something in my face. I didn't know what it was. I knew it smelled horrible. I can't say that it was particularly painful, but they ran off, and I looked down, and I could see blood. I could see skin, on the pavement, and I knew instantly that it was acid. And I, I had a bag in my hand, my work gear, and I ran to the end of the road, and I ran into the newsagent shop, and I said, "Please help me. Somebody's just thrown acid over me."
What did these people do?
There was a customer in there, and there was a lady behind the counter, and she said, "Come with me." And she sort of took me up a few steps to a bathroom. She got me over a sink, and she started pouring water over me to dilute the acid. Um, None of us knew whether that was the right thing to do or not. As it turns out, it was the right thing to do, but with some substances, it could have been the wrong thing to do. So she certainly helped to dilute the acid and to slow down the damage that it was doing to me at the time. Meanwhile, she called an ambulance and she called the police.
What was going through your head? Can you remember?
It was sort of confusion. I just, in my mind, I was thinking, this is so embarrassing. I'm going to be late for work. Um, I didn't think I realised how serious it was. Um, it became more apparent once the paramedics or the ambulance arrived, and they sort of told me what was going to happen. But at the time, it was just confusion, fear, a bit of panic, and concern that I was going to be late for work.
Were you in pain by now?
I don't think I can't remember the pain at that moment. I remember the pain later on, but I don't remember it at that moment. And it may be because the acid had damaged the nerve endings in the skin, so that the nerve endings were sort of killed off, so that the pain wasn't, it wasn't apparent.
I see. So in the ambulance, the paramedics told you what was going to happen. What did they tell you?
They said, "We're going to take you to University College Hospital, and we're going to keep, pouring water over you while we're on our way." They had some some woolen stuff they put over, and were keeping it wet, irrigating it. They said, "We're going to take you there. They'll assess you, and then you probably need to go to a burns unit." And they said the nearest one that's available at the moment was going to be in East Grinstead in East Sussex.
Is that where you went?
That's where I ultimately went. Yes. I was in University College for a while. When I arrived into the emergency room, at that point, I started to feel the pain. I started to get upset. I asked them to call my parents, which they did, but they kept coming back saying, "We can't get hold of them, we can't get hold of them." and they gave me some intravenous medication, morphine, I presume, which calmed me right down. So I was able to, sort of collect myself and just sort of, they were reassuring me they were doing what they had to do. And they were making arrangements for the ambulance to take me to East Grinstead.
Had the burns unit ever had a previous experience of acid attacks?
I think they had, yes, and certainly there was other people there that had similar sort of injuries caused by fire. So yeah, they were quite experienced with facial reconstruction, facial surgery. But again, it was 1986. If you think about the skills now and the work that they do for people now, similar to what they'd done for Katie Piper, they were unable to do that at that time. So they could only do what at that time was their best. And it probably would have had a better outcome now.
Were you asking them questions? What's going to happen to me?
Well, I had the long ambulance journey. It's quite a long journey to East Grinstead into the specialist burns unit and into a specialist area, like resus area. And I was in there for about 4 hours, not really talking very much. One, because of the morphine, and two, because I just wanted them to get on with whatever they needed to do. Still thinking that once they've done that, then I'll go back, or I can go to a bed and go home. It still hadn't sort of dawned on me. Once they'd finished in the resus area, they then took me to a room, and in the burns unit, because of the high risk of infection, everybody is barrier nursed in their own little rooms. So you have one door in, one door out. Nobody can touch you with their hands. It's quite strict for infection control. And it was at that point that somebody said to me, did I want to see in a mirror? Did I want to see? And I did. I looked in this mirror, and my neck and my face was very dark brown, and it looked like it had like a hard crust, brown crust on it. But it didn't look too different to normal, except it was very discolored. And the nurse said to me that what's going to happen is over the next few weeks, all of your skin is going to contract, and it's going to shrink, and it's going to pull your head down, it's going to pull your mouth, it's going to pull your eyes. We can't stop that. But what we will do is, when it's finished, is we will be able to start putting skin back in and build it back up again. So at that point, I sort of knew then that this was going to be a long process.
Did they tell you at that point roughly how long this process was going to be?
They said it would take, for the first surgery and for the between each surgery, there has to be a period for the contractions again. So they said it would probably be about 3 months. And in actual fact, I think I was in the burns unit for about 9 months. And then I was transferred to their other wing, Canadian wing it's called, for the next sort of 2 years, on and off. I'd have several weeks in, several weeks out, several weeks in, several weeks out. Each time they were harvesting skin from somewhere else on the body and grafting it, letting it heal, letting it contract. Sometimes it would fall off, it would reject it, and we'd have to do it again. And my eyelids disappeared completely. They shrank right back. My eye got burnt. And what they should have done is put a clear contact lens over my eye to protect the cornea. But they didn't. I didn't know that they were supposed to do that. I found out later on that they should have done that. And because they didn't, my cornea vascularized. So blood supply went to my cornea. And as a result, I've got a skin over that eye. So I wear a cosmetic lens now.
So you're blind in that eye.
Yeah.
Did the staff tell you at every stage what they were going to do? I suppose they had to, because they had to ask your permission where they could take the skin grafts from.
I mean, I'm a nurse now. I wasn't a nurse then. I didn't know anything about medical procedures. Like a lot of people, I just respect and trust that doctors and nurses know what they're doing, and I have to rely on them. If they say we need to take skin from there, then they take it. They shaved the skin off of both of my thighs. In fact, that was more painful than anything else, because it's like it's like having, if you're dragged along gravel on both of my thighs, and then when that all healed, they then did it again. They also took a flap, a full thickness flap from my stomach to graft into my neck. They took, they wanted to use my foreskin for my eyelids, but I was reluctant to part with that, and I said no to that. So they used the skin in here for my eyelids, which I think has been pretty successful. And then they used the inner lining of my cheek for the inside of the eyelid.
So this is inside your cheek.
Yeah, so like the inside of my cheek was used for the inside of the eyelid because it's mucal membrane, so it's moist, which meant I had a mouth ulcer that size, which was painful. And then each time, they would often say, we expect it to look like this and it'll be a good result, but the reality is it's never as good as you expect it to be, because you can never recreate normal skin. You just can't get that smooth skin, soft textured skin, because it's always going to be scar tissue. But they did their best at the time, and as you can see, I don't know if you can see, I've got quite a lot of still I've got a lot of contractures where it shrinks, and they had to cut it to try to release the contractures. But I've sort of lived with it longer now. I've had it 35 years, and I was 25 at the time, so I've lived with it longer now. It's who I am now.
How many operations, Andrew? Did you count them?
I think I lost count. I'm guessing there was around 70 or 80 general anaesthetics. And actually, I did start to fear the anaesthetic. I used to panic that I was never going to wake up this time. This will be the time that I never wake up. I was on a lot of benzodiazepine medication for my anxiety and to keep me calm, especially when they were coming to like take stitches out my eyelids or something. I would get really panicky. So they would, sort of dose me up before they did anything. Even just cleaning the wounds when they've done some skin grafting was quite a sore and painful procedure. So I was pretty hooked on lorazepam.
During this long period, are you yourself observing how the work is progressing?
I lived in a constant state of disappointment because I wanted it to be better than it was. And I thought each time, this time it's going to look better. This time it's going to look different. Maybe this time. And you keep going and you keep going. You think, well, I'll have another one. I'll have another one. I'll have another one. And I think you get to a stage, you get to a point, and I probably got to that point after about 6 years, where I thought it's not going to get significantly better. I can keep going in, keep going in, keep going in and being let down, or I can learn to accept the way that I look now.
And that's what you did. You
And
called.
that's what I did.
Was there any time during this period where you felt despair?
I think the despair really came when I was discharged from the hospital. After about 3 years of being in hospital for the majority of that time, I then had to face several things. My house had been repossessed in my absence. I'd lost my job in my absence. My car had been towed and destroyed in my absence. My dog had been taken away and adopted in my absence. So all those sorts of things I had to deal with. The council were really good, and they housed me. It's probably different in those days, but just one letter from my GP got me a really nice flat within a couple of days. So I was quite lucky that I got somewhere to live. But I think from my experience, when you're in the hospital, you're surrounded in a bubble of people who care, people who are used to this sort of thing, and they sort of support you, and you feel comforted by that. When you see family and friends and that, they sort of make an effort because they're shocked by it, and they're trying to be sensitive to that, but they become used to it, so they sort of step back then, because you're back home now, so they step back. So it was at that point, when I was back home alone, still unable to work, just myself for company, that actually my mood started to go down. I did ask at the hospital if there was any counselling available. Their reaction was a bit sort of strange, as if I'd asked for something odd. And they said the Lady Almoner will come and see you before you're discharged. And the Lady Almoner came in, and she looked like a nun. She had this headdress on. She sat next to me, and she held my hand. And she said, you're going to notice a big difference when you leave hospital. People are going to look at you. And I said, I'm aware of that. And then she smacked my hand and she said, but you'll be all right. And then she left. And that was the extent of the counselling that I had. So I had no preparation, no support, no backup, no follow-up care at all.
Never had any.
Never had any.
Now, that has
sorry.
changed. That situation has changed, hasn't it?
Yeah, oh yes, absolutely. There'd be regular reviews and appointments to see how things are progressing, to see if there's anything else that can be done. I carried on having surgeries after that, but they were done in Brighton, in there, because the surgeon from East Grinstead had a clinic there, so I had them in Brighton. And the last surgery I had was after I became a nurse, was in St George's, back in London, where I was training to be a nurse.
So prior to that, for a long period of time, basically your life was on hold.
Absolutely, absolutely. Everything went. I had nothing. I should say that in the midst of all this, there was a police investigation. And on the day, I think it was the day after admission, the police came to the hospital to question me, to give a statement, and to take all my clothing away for forensics. And I told them exactly what happened, as I've told you. I gave them the clothing. I said that my ex might have had something to do with it. I don't know.
Just ask you, Andrew, did you get the merest glimpse of your attacker?
I did, and I gave them a description. But it, as I said, it was East Dulwich. He seemed like a young guy, probably in his 20s, black, wearing denim, and that pretty much described most people around the streets at that time. So it wasn't much of a help, because almost as I turned, I got the acid in my face. So I couldn't really give a detailed description.
So tell us now about the police investigation.
Well, as I say, I gave them the statement. I told them exactly what happened. I gave them the name of my ex. I gave them the clothing. And the police officer said to me, I think you're lying. And I said, what do you mean I'm lying? I said, I've told you what's happened. And he said, I think you're lying. I think you know who's done this and you're protecting somebody. I said, I'm not protecting anyone. I said, I've told you who I think might be involved, but I've told you everything that I know. I said, if my father had done it, I would tell you. You know, I wouldn't protect somebody who's done this to me. But that was the last time I saw a police officer, until about 2 years later, when 4 years later, when I went to appeal the criminal injuries compensation decision to turn me down for compensation. And they turned me down because the police officer said they thought I'd lied to them. At the appeal hearing, which was 4 years after the attack, that police officer was there. And they questioned him as to what evidence he had that I was lying. And his words were a hunch, 15 years of experience.
So by his reasoning, what is why would you lie about such a thing? Why would you protect your attack?
I would lie because I would get the compensation, and then I would be able to split the compensation with the person that caused the injury.
That is unbelievable.
Well, the board, it was a board panel of criminal injuries compensation judges. They went off to make a decision, and the clerk of the court come over and said, you know, you did very well. And he said, I think they will make you an interim payment today. And I think that you'll be looking at maybe £200,000, which sounded a lot of money in those days. Anyway, we waited, and they came out and they upheld the decision not to give me compensation.
Have you had any compensation to this day?
No, nothing. I tried to appeal it. I took out a complaint against the police, and I had an interview at Scotland Yard by 3 big burly inspectors or whatever they are, who just talked at me and talked at me and talked at me for about 3 hours until I agreed to not pursue it, because they just wore me down. I tried my MP. I tried writing to the Prime Minister. I did a Radio 5 show with other people who had been turned down for ridiculous reasons, to try to raise the issue that you know, they're discriminating when they're allocating these monies. But it didn't get anywhere. It didn't get me anywhere. It just left me with huge debts, solicitors' fees, which my father had to sell up, cash in his life insurance policies to pay for.
Bitterness? Did it leave you with bitterness as well?
It did. It left me bitter and angry, not at what had happened, but at a system that's set up to support victims, but didn't support me.
And I believe you also had no support whatever from the tabloid press. Am I right?
That's right. I can't remember if I did or my family contacted the tabloids, the Sun, and they came to my flat in London. Very pleasant. They were doing the interview. They were writing it all down, going ahead. They were going to publish it. They were going to talk about it. And I then happened to mention that my partner was male. And this journalist said, oh, you're gay. He said, okay, well, listen, we've done enough for today. I'll have to go. We'll be in touch. That's the last I ever heard of them.
There was no story.
So there was no story. No story, no reason, nothing. But it was immediately after I said that I was gay.
But up until that point, you felt that
they'd been there for about an hour and a half writing it all up. They were really interested up till that point. And I thought, well, maybe this will make the national papers. Then the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board will have to respond to that in some way. It will raise that issue, but it never got that far.
This is astounding, Andrew.
Mm.
But the worst is over, because now we're going to jump to the point where I met you.
Yes,
I've looked in my diary, and it's 1995, so it's 9 years after that night. I
yes,
already had heard about you because my friend was Sue Drouet. Uh,
yeah.
and she'd been telling me a lot about you, and I was very interested to meet you. I think I'm right in saying that the first night we went clubbing. Am I allowed to say that?
Yes, we did in Brixton.
It was. Tell me, how did you and Sue meet? Because this was the beginning of the rest of your life, wasn't it?
Yes, after after I was attacked, after I got my own place, I needed to go back to work. I contacted Eagle Star Insurance to see if I could come back because they were still paying me. They'd been very good. Um, and they said, we can't have you back, sadly. And I said, why? They said, because your face would be distracting for the diners. So at that point, I got a little job as a cook in a residential care home for people with learning disabilities. And I actually quite enjoyed working with the clients. It felt a bit like being back in the hospital. It felt sort of safe. and that's when I decided that nursing was the way to go. And I chose psychiatry. I think partly I chose it because I thought it might help me deal with my stuff as well. Um, and I passed the entry exams and I applied to 3 hospitals. The first 2 both wanted to offer me a place, but they said I'd have to work there as a care assistant first to see how the patients reacted to my face. Whereas St George's didn't bother them. They offered me an unconditional place straight away.
I have to say, reactions like this would be illegal nowadays, wouldn't they?
Of course they would. Of course they would. And so yeah, I did my training, and soon after I qualified, I started volunteering for the Terence Higgins Trust as a buddy, and that's how I met Sue, because she was a buddy too. We were in the same group, support group, and then I started giving her a lift home, and that's how we became friends. That's how I met you.
It's true. Well, she told me before I met you that there was one night you had, the two of you, you'd sat up all night talking. What what was the subject of that conversation?
I think there was probably several. There was probably quite a lot about some of the things I used to get up to before all this happened. A lot about her and her ex. Um, a lot about why we were doing the job that we were doing, and quite a bit about the both of us had a desire to have children, and we talked a lot about that. And one of those nights is when we sort of decided that that's what we were going to do. We were going to have children together.
Had you always wanted children?
No, no, it hadn't been something that was on my mind, or something I never thought I would ever have, because I was a gay man. But I don't know. I just felt it wouldn't it be wonderful if I had children. Yeah, so I think that prior to all of this, I was quite a sort of superficial gay man on the scene, and what I learned after that was that the gay scene really didn't react favourably to me and would be quite negative. And I think it made me reevaluate my life and what life was all about and what was truly important in life. And I come from quite a close family, and I think it was at that point that I felt that it's a shame I can't have children. And then when Sue said that she wanted to have children, that opened up a conversation between us.
So, not that we want to get too graphic, but how did you set about as a gay man having a family with a woman?
Well, lots of talking and lots of practice. I have to say it took nearly a year, um, but we did it with a syringe and a cup. Turkey baster was no good. It didn't have enough oomph.
You tried the turkey baster, did you?
Yeah, didn't have enough oomph. The first time I used the syringe, when I pushed the plunger in to get it back in, I pushed it in too hard, and Sue then had bits of me all over her ceiling. And so we had to wait another month. But we perfected the technique in the end, and we got there in the end.
A year's not bad, really, is it?
No, no.
You've now got two children. I think you've got a photo of them there as well.
I have got a photo of them there, but unfortunately, I didn't bring it up with me. um,
Well, let's have.
but I'll bring it for part two.
Yes, please. Tell us their names.
It's Alfie, who's now 24, and Molly, who's 23. They were born 51 weeks apart because we got the technique so well that we can see first time the second time.
Tell us about them. How are they doing?
They're amazing. They're amazing children because they are so cool with everything. They've been brought up with gay friends, gay father. They've just been brought up with it. They're very cool. They're very supportive. When I married my husband, my son was my best man, and my daughter gave a speech at my wedding. And when I came out and did a drag show as part of the wedding, my daughter did my makeup. So
Let's just backtrack. You and Sue did separate, and then subsequently you've married your husband. When was that?
that was 10 years ago this year.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Um, now, this is a what if situation. Obviously, you can't. Nobody can tell us what would have happened had it not been for that night in 1986. But you have said that it's because of that incident that your life turned out the way it has done.
It certainly has. I think, when something terrible like this happens to you, it's very easy to just focus on the negativity and the bad aspect of it. But actually, after so many years, I'm able to look back and reflect and actually see that a lot of positives have come from this experience as well. I think it's given me a much better, wider, broader sense of myself, self-awareness. Um, I wouldn't have my children because I wouldn't have met Sue. I wouldn't have gone into nursing. I wouldn't have had the lifestyle that I've got. I wouldn't have had the income that I get now. Um, I think that's a real positive, that so much good can come of that. And in my career, which I'll talk about a bit later, there's been some milestones of achievement in that, which has really helped hundreds of people. So other people have benefited, if you like, as well.
And you never envisaged this kind of life. That's the most interesting thing.
I never envisaged it, and up until the children were born, people used to say, if you could go back and get your face back, would you swap? And I used to say I would. I would give back everything just to get my face back. But after my children were born, that changed, and it's the same now. I wouldn't change a single thing.
That is an extraordinary statement, Andrew.
Yeah.
I'm very, very pleased to hear that. I really am.
Yeah. Thank you.
I want to talk a lot more, but unfortunately, we have run out of time. But can we continue this on Patreon?
Yes, yeah, it'd be a pleasure.
Marvellous. In that case, that's what we're going to do. I want to talk a lot more about your work today. I want to talk about esteem, which we haven't talked about, and I want to ask you a lot of very personal things about how you feel about the past.
Yeah.
We're going to do that on Patreon. Subscribers, please join us right now. We're waiting for you. And if you're not a subscriber, please consider joining us. There's the link right there. But for now, for YouTube, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Join me again next week when my guest will be Alan Corduna, multi-talented actor, probably best known for playing Sir Arthur Sullivan in Mike Leigh's Topsy Turvy, but my goodness, he's done a lot more than that, and he's a very funny man as well. Join us then. Until then, this is David McGillivray saying bye-bye.